50,000. The minimum estimated worldwide orca population is 50,000, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And now that's a pretty dismal number. If that's the case, there are 120,000 humans on the planet for every one orca whale. The ocean makes up 70% of the Earth, and they can't thrive in that 70% the way that we thrive in our 30% of the world. Here's another figure for you. 57. There are approximately 57 orcas being held in captivity around the world, according to uswhales.org. Now, if that's an accurate figure, there is one whale captive for every 878 whales in the wild. Now, there are 7 billion people in the world, and there are only 9 million prisoners. That means that there is one prisoner for every 667 people. So the ratio between prisoners and captive whales, respective to their population, is 1 to 1.3. The people in prison are there because of their crimes. They're there because of rape, murder, drugs, while these whales are in captivity simply because we want to look at them. There are many adverse effects surrounding keeping these whales captives, and these whales belong in the wild. But the biggest offender of keeping these whales captive is SeaWorld. One might wonder, how does SeaWorld get these orcas? Well, hunters go out and they pick out the babies from their families and they sell them into captivity. Male babies sell for more because they grow and they eventually produce sperm that's worth millions to owners and breeders across the world. Whales are extremely family-oriented individuals, and there's a case reported by SeaWorld employees on the documentary Blackfish of owners in SeaWorld needing a baby whale at a location on the West Coast, and there was a new baby at a different branch. The owners began the process of moving him to California. Now, naturally, the mother was distraught at the idea of losing her baby, and when they lifted the baby out of the water using the crane, the mother began crying. She began weeping so loudly that many people in the park far away from the tank heard the screams, and veterinarians on the site discovered something new that day as the baby was loaded onto the truck and taken away from their mother. The mother made noises that the staff and vets had never heard before, and they hypothesized that the mother was sending out a long-distance distress call and that she was trying to communicate and continued trying to communicate to her baby as the baby was taken hundreds of miles away. There's another phenomenon that occurs in captivity that doesn't really occur in the wild, where males exhibit a droopy dorsal fin. 100% of males in captivity exhibit this droopy dorsal fin. No one's really sure what causes this droopy dorsal fin, but SeaWorld claims that it's a genetic factor. However, less than 1% of orcas in the wild exhibit this droopy dorsal fin. Now, if this was a genetic factor, one would expect to see the same amount of whales in the wild and the whales in captivity exhibiting this trait. It's also hypothesized that the droopy dorsal fin is caused because the whale never sees the cooler water in captivity. The deeper and cooler water and the pressure exerted by the water is theorized to provide support for the cartilage within this dorsal fin. And since these whales don't see the depths of the cooler water, that may be a cause of the collapse. Other theories include stress and age being factors. Since these fins collapse at young ages as well, it stands to reason that the only potential causes of this droopy dorsal fin is the wrong environment and the stress of being paraded around as a show puppet. Now I want to tell you the story of one particular whale in captivity, and his name's Tilikum. Tilikum was a whale that was captured from his mother in Iceland. Tilikum was shipped to a park called Sealand in British Columbia, Canada. Sealand, much like SeaWorld, was famous for its orcas that were their feature attraction. The other whales were not keen on Tilikum coming into their tank as a new figure. They began raking Tilikum. Now, raking is a process that dominant whales use to exert their superiority over the weaker whales. And they literally take their teeth and rake it down the sides and the back of the weaker whale. Not only that, but if he didn't perform a trick correctly, he was deprived of food. And if he didn't go into his little 35-foot holding cell, when asked, they deprived him of food once again, thinking that if he was hungry enough, he would eventually go into his cell where the food was. Now, all of this leads to a very angry, hungry, frustrated monster of a whale. Tilikum was then and remains the largest orca in captivity, and he tips the scales at 12,500 pounds, and he is an astonishing 22 feet in length. In 1991, a 20-year-old trainer slipped and fell into the whale pool after a show, and Tilikum grabbed her and drug her underwater repeatedly until she drowned. A year and a half later, Tilikum was sold to SeaWorld Orlando. Just 8 years after his incident in Sealand, Tilikum struck again. In 1999, a man named Daniel P. Dukes snuck into SeaWorld and ended up in the wrong tank at the wrong time. Tilikum stripped Dukes of his clothes and neutered him before he killed him sometime in the night. In 2010, Tilikum killed once again after a show. Senior trainer Dawn Branshaw was performing a cool-down activity with Tilikum. Now, she performed this cool-down activity often after every show. She simply went into a shallow part of the tank, and Tilikum would hop onto the shallow platform and just bond with Dawn. She would lay with Tilikum and calm him down after the show and build a relationship. Now, this day, Tilikum jumped up on the platform as usual, but everything about this day was not typical. According to eyewitness accounts, the massive whale grabbed Dawn by the arm and pulled her into the water. She fought hard and broke free, but she began swimming to the surface, and when she started to swim to the surface, Tilikum slammed into her, and then he grabbed her and held her underwater until she expired. 3 deaths. 3 deaths were caused by this massive orca. Aggression has been shown to have a genetic link, linked with the fight-or-flight response of an individual. Knowing this, SeaWorld continued to breed Tilikum. Now, over 54% of the orcas within the SeaWorld organization are direct descendants of Tilikum. It should be noted that according to science.kqed, orcas do not attack humans unprovoked in the wild. According to the documentary Blackfish and orcahome.de, the number of attacks within the confines of SeaWorld have been over 130. There have been 130 documented attacks at SeaWorld. So what causes this undue aggression towards trainers? The environment. These whales are supposed to be in the oceans. Hundreds of miles of travel per day, thousands of pounds of fish eaten. This should be the place for orcas. Instead, they're locked in cages, paraded in pools no deeper than 50 feet. The pools are barely longer than a football field, and these whales would have to swim the perimeter of the pool hundreds of times to equal the amount of swimming that they would do in the wild per day. These conditions are not healthy for the animal. Lifespans of an orca in the wild range up to 70 years in a male and 90 years in females. The average orca in SeaWorld lives about 35 years. Less than half the lifespan of those in the wild. Now, I've been guilty of supporting SeaWorld. I remember thinking as a young teenager when I visited SeaWorld how cool it would be to be a trainer and to swim with these magnificent animals. But it's time for people to realize what we're doing to these animals. It's time for a change.